Welcome everybody to another episode of the ArenaLabs PvP Podcast. I am your host Sneakers, joined by Crayola.
Hello, and today we are joined by Roy, the one and only.
Hello, how's it going?
It's good, bro. Good man. A friend from over the pond. You know, it's nice to have someone from the US basically on the show finally.
Well, seems he's from the US, but
oh yeah, but you know, we like a player, one on the player side.
yeah.
You know,
Fair enough. Yeah, that's true.
So
Gotcha.
those who may be living under a rock and have never heard of you, Roy, right? Because you're a big part of the community. I've known you. You are.
For sure,
yeah. You shoutcast pretty much every MAT on the NA side. You shoutcast all the community tournaments. Your community engagement is fantastic. So for those who don't know you, in fact, the first thing we always ask players is what classes do you play? That's a big thing.
Mostly in PvP, Revenant, Power Rev, World vs. World, usually Firebrand or Core Guardian. And then I don't really PvE very much. If I was going to, it'd probably be, also Guardian, DPS Guard.
We don't talk about that side of the game.
Yeah, fair enough.
It's the shadowy area that we don't like to talk about. But so obviously you're a shoutcaster more than anything, I'd say, from my personal experience with you. Would you say that's accurate?
At this point, yeah. I would say that's mostly what I've been doing. It wasn't always like that, but definitely the last year or so, it's probably been the main focus of what I sort of do in the game, I guess.
Well, how'd you get into
it? So I actually started out in the World vs. World and GVG scene, and that was really where that was when I started really playing the game a lot more, and getting involved with community events and stuff. And then me and a friend of mine started organizing GVG tournaments, and I actually started casting those. And then a couple months later, Jebro, who I assume you guys have heard of, started organizing the UGO, and he was looking for people to cast with him. I didn't know a lot about the PvP scene at the time. I hadn't really gotten involved with it very much. I mean, I casually played PvP, but I didn't really know too much about it. But I really, I enjoyed casting the GVGs, and I thought maybe I would give it a try. It looked like fun. I wanted to get more involved with that sort of part of the game. And so I started out casting the NA UGOs with Jebro. And then we sort of started working well together, I guess. And I pretty much became his regular co-host for the UGOs. And we did that for quite a while. I think we did 2 every month for maybe like 10 months or something. Took a bit of a break. We started them up again at one point, took another break, and then unfortunately we didn't really keep going with it. But it was mostly Jebro really that got me into casting, I guess.
That's awesome, man. Like, he was one of the main casters for all the tournaments as well, right?
Yeah, back in Worlds and Pro League and all that.
So going on like GVG and things like that, so that's obviously a fully community side, like run game mode in a nutshell. Is that something that was quite difficult to set up?
Yes and no. So I was the first couple years of the game, because I've played since release. I just kind of PvE'd, and I didn't really do very much. I like played with my guild, and I ran some guild events and stuff, but I wasn't really involved with the bigger community. But when I started playing World vs. World, I really got interested in the community, just because, as you mentioned, I mean, GVG specifically it's completely community run game mode, and World vs. World sort of revolves around the community. Without the community, it's a much weaker game mode, and so that really got me interested in it. That's when I started getting more involved with the community and stuff. And so I would say I was somewhat known in the World vs. World community, because I did a lot of tagging up and public leading and stuff. And this was all on EU. I played on EU, even though I am from NA, as you pointed out. I mostly played on EU back for the first few years of the game. And so, when me and my friend, we started sort of organizing the GVG scene a little bit more, I had already been playing GVG. I'd already been GVGing and playing in the community for a couple of years. So, it wasn't necessarily hard for us to get sort of a basis for everything, but actually setting up the tournament itself is near impossible just because there's no real place to GVG in the game. Again, yeah, as you say, everything's community driven, everything's community run. We had to come up with our own rule set, etc. And then, of course, obviously, in terms of the production side, we were doing everything ourselves. Not that it necessarily entailed a lot, but it was a lot of micromanagement and stuff. Especially because World of role players, they're a little, they need a little bit of hurting sometimes, I guess.
Yeah, I'm just kind of curious about like sort of how you've organized that, because community run events can be chaotic from our standpoint. Like Crayola runs the in-house games that we run every Sunday and things. I'm just wondering if there was any sort of hurdles that you had to come across during that process.
Any sort of what?
Any sort of hurdles? Yes.
Yeah. Well, so the first one that we ran was kind of a total failure, to be honest. We didn't really know what we were doing. We hadn't really had any experience with it before, and some of the rule sets we used just weren't really bad, or they didn't really work very well. And scheduling was also just a really big issue because there'd be times where guilds they wouldn't agree to a certain day to fight or whatever. We did it over too long of a period of time, and it ended up burning some guilds out. We've done, we in total we've probably done upwards of 10 tournaments, I want to say, and I mean I did some on an A as well, and I mean over time it certainly got easier. Again, the biggest sort of hurdle, as you say, was definitely just that there wasn't a proper arena for us to use. So, we were very limited in terms of the actual resources we had at our disposal. But, it definitely got easier to run things once we kind of had a bit more of an idea of what we were doing, I'd say.
Okay, that's really cool. Obviously, this is a PvP podcast. We primarily talk about conquest and things. But I do like World v World. It's just sort of even more neglected than PvP, which is quite sad.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to this. I don't without harshing on ArenaNet too much. I do agree. They've certainly neglected the community. I mean, obviously GVG is not really even a real game mode in Guild Wars 2, unfortunately. And it is sad, but I do also think that the community has kind of shot itself in the foot on multiple occasions. It's also just it's such a big community and such a hard and diverse community to manage and to try and cater to. So there's definitely, it's not just on Arena, I would say. And also, I think World of World as a game mode is something that can sustain itself, but certainly not without any help at all. And I think for a large part of the game, it hasn't really received any help, which is definitely unfortunate.
So on the GVG front, it's 15v15, right?
Yeah, so it hasn't always been 15v15. Before HOT, usually people would, not all the time, but a lot of people would be doing 20s, 20v20. Occasionally, you might even see 25v25, but there were also guilds that would run a bit smaller, and they would do 15v15. And then after HOT, the norm pretty much became 15v15. You still get some groups that, although there aren't really many guilds on either region right now GVGing, but there were some groups when it was a bit more active that wanted to do 20s instead of 15s. They just had larger groups, and so they didn't want to sit as many people. But for the most part, the normal numbers were 15.
The reason I'm asking about it is because there's often quite a lot of discussion on the forums and Reddit about additional game modes for PvP. So a lot of people enjoy the 2v2s, the 3v3s, and so there was what was the old ones? The hot join ones, wasn't there? It used to be where it could be like 8v8. How chaotic is the 15v15? Because like when I play World v World with sort of Zergs, it's chaos.
Yeah. This is something that I say pretty much whenever someone brings this up, and it's just, first of all, Guild Wars 2 as a spectator sport isn't, it can be kind of hard to watch if you haven't played the game yourself. Even PvP, when it's 5v5, it can be definitely pretty hard to watch. And of course, with World versus World, and you have 50, 60 people on each side, it obviously, as you said, just gets way more chaotic. And to some extent, that's going to exist no matter what. But definitely, just I think playing the game mode and understanding it definitely seems a lot less chaotic to me. It's a lot easier for me to be able to see things and understand what's going on just because I've played it for so long. And honestly, GVG, there's definitely times where it can, things can maybe spiral out of control a little bit, but for the most part, it really it kind of just clicks with me. And I think this would be the same for pretty much anyone who GVGs regularly. It doesn't really seem as chaotic. There's definitely a lot of really big AoEs from Necros and stuff, and of course Winds of Disenchantment now, and back in the day when you'd run feedback and all the gravity wells and whatnot, time warp on Mesmer. There's huge animations, and it can kind of seem like a bit of a cluster sometimes. But for the most part, I think that just playing it kind of makes it seem not simple, but I understand it, and I think pretty much anyone who GVGs regularly understands it as well.
Yeah.
Something that you said there was like really interesting. It did resonate with me, where you mentioned where Guild Wars 2 is really hard to sort of spectate unless you've played the game, which I really agree with.
Yeah.
There's so many sort of key animations and things like that. Do you reckon there's anything that would benefit the spectator, like ArenaNet could potentially add? I don't know if you've ever sort of thought about that as a shoutcaster, anything that would even benefit you.
So this is something that me and Teapot, mostly Teapot, really wanted to try and fix with the MODA. He wanted to make it more of a viewable event to people who either weren't as experienced with PvP or Guild Wars 2 in general. And so one of the ideas he had, and I think we just didn't have time to implement it, or he ran into some issues trying to figure out the software for it. So one of the things he wanted to do was bring up little sort of things on screen that would tell you what a specific skill did, or give you more information about a specific player or whatever. And so obviously one of the big drawbacks with Guild Wars 2 PvP and it being a spectator sport is obviously the game, it just isn't as popular as League of Legends or another really big esports, right? So people in general just aren't going to be as familiar with it. And the other thing, of course, is that if you look at a MOBA, which obviously a very popular genre for esports, or CS:GO, both of those, I think at their root, obviously there's a lot of complexity to them, and especially with things like League, where you have tons of champions and they all have specific abilities, and then of course all the items you can build. But at their base, the sort of goal isn't necessarily hard to understand. It's not exactly hard to see if one person wins their lane, or the jungler gets a good gank. But with Guild Wars 2, obviously again, one team gets 500 points, they win. But team fights specifically, the specific rotations, it's not necessarily easy to understand and watch and sort of get an idea of what's going on and why one team is winning over the other team unless you've played the game. And even if you have, it can be pretty hard to understand, I think, especially at sort of the higher end. And I don't know that there's necessarily one specific thing that would make it easier, again, apart from just, I think, the game getting more exposure. I think that the spectate system isn't bad. I think that there's obviously some things that you miss when you're spectating. There's timers that you don't always see for buffs coming up and stuff, or different map mechanics, which obviously is just a drawback to the spectate UI itself. But in general, I think the biggest thing that the game needs is just more exposure and people getting a better grasp and understanding of what's going on, and also maybe more events happening, and also just, I don't want to say like better casters necessarily, because I don't want to. I think the people that casted the game in the past and stuff have all done a good job of it, but I think right now there's not a lot of different people doing it. Not that there necessarily needs to be, but I think if there were more people doing it and doing a good job of sort of explaining what's going on, and it's not just for casting either. Top PvP players and stuff making guides or streaming, which of course there's a decent amount of them that do. But I don't know that people necessarily take advantage of that enough either.
For sure. I mean, that's exactly what we're trying to do with the in-houses, because that's the way you can kind of teach the community, and the community can teach itself.
Yeah.
By the games being casted by players, and players having conversation in the midst of those games about what's going on.
Yeah.
I mean, I got a couple questions, but like, first off, how do you approach your casting, like, or how did you approach it?
Well, so it's changed a lot, I think, over the years. Something you had mentioned before we sort of started recording was that I can talk pretty fast, and I think that's something that people tend to notice when I cast. And one of the sort of advantages I had was, as I mentioned, I started out playing World versus World and leading, and a lot of World vs. World commanders, I mean, some people think of it kind of as a joke, but a lot of World vs. World commanders will, try to talk very fast to communicate what they want. And I was able to do that. I got pretty good at it at one point. And so I think it was a little bit easier for me to sort of start getting into that. But it was really weird for me because casting wasn't really something I'd ever kind of planned to do. It wasn't really something I had ever thought about until it kind of just happened. And again, I think I got kind of lucky because, I had Jebro there when I started casting PvP, and he gave me a lot of feedback and he gave me a lot of tips. I actually reached out to a couple different people as well when I started casting, and asked for some suggestions. When I first started doing the UGOs, Helseth was one person who I asked some stuff about. Herix, who I don't know if you guys are familiar with, but he used to cast some Guild Wars 2 PvP and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was honestly really helpful. But I mean, the biggest thing for me was just, I think over time, I just got better at it. Fortunately, Guild Wars 2, the game isn't exactly, the meta obviously can change, but, I think that once you kind of get used to it, and I assume this might be the same for other games as well, it's not like there's a ton of things happening that will mean, make you change the way you have to cast. I've also, I feel like I'm pretty good at processing information quickly and saying what's going on. Again, I think that was partially due to having played World vs. World for so long. You have to constantly be sort of seeing what the enemy group is doing and play around that. And so that was helpful. But the biggest thing for me is Guild Wars 2 is a little bit different than other games, I think, just from watching like esports and stuff, because I obviously haven't cast other games. But usually on a broadcast, if you're streaming League or something, you'll have two casters, right? One will be the play-by-play caster, one will be the color caster. Guild Wars 2 is a little bit different because I think it's a little bit harder to have those specific roles, just because a lot of the time, a game of PvP, there's almost nonstop action. There isn't really breaks in the play as much, at least for most metas. Sometimes if there's just bunker comps and stuff, that'll happen, but in that case, you're not really talking too much about what could happen, what's going on. So a lot of the times, I think there's a little bit harder of a distinction to have in Guild Wars 2 casting between play-by-play and color casting. So you kind of have to be able to do both. I feel that I can do both. I feel that, obviously I can do the play-by-play. Color casting, I feel confident enough. I think there's people that can do it better than me who have better game knowledge and stuff, but I certainly feel confident doing it. But in general, if I'm approaching a broadcast, I'll usually consider myself the play-by-play caster and try to, cast those really big team fights, and do most of them. But I think having people that can do both in Guild Wars 2 is pretty good. And I think most of the people that I've casted with in the past can do it.
Yeah, so it's not like you talking about game sense and having the actual shoutcasters understand the game, because I went back and I was watching some of the old ESL games.
Mm-hmm.
And yes, the shoutcasters do a fantastic job of sort of the hype. I would call them more hype men, but their understanding, it would just be like, okay, he's going here, and I'm like, I can kind of see that. Why is he going there? That's the reason that what we quite like to hear is like he's going there because to sort of counter this, or he has to go here to sort of spread the map out and so they don't get snowballed. That's sort of the key things that we like to hear, and then it gives players an understanding. It's a bit sort of chaotic. He's going there just to +1. All right, cool. I know
I
that.
think in that sense, the casters and whoever's kind of portraying what's going on needs to have a certain knowledge of the game and needs to be in it, like in the meta right now, to understand it. Of course, besides being able to convey the information fast and talk fast, like he needs to know what he's talking about. Because Sneaks for sure. Like I watched all of those games while they were going on years ago, and I was thinking, yes, I know this. Yeah. He's jumping down.
Yeah, I agree, and like I mentioned before, I can talk fast and stuff, and that's great and all, but at the end of the day, that just sounds nice sometimes. If you're saying things that don't matter or don't make sense, it's certainly not. I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm doing a good job casting if I'm just kind of speaking nonsense, even if it is fast. But I think, go ahead.
I was just thinking as well, from a shoutcaster's point of view, like from a spectator, I just something that popped back into my head before, because you obviously shoutcasted one of the Guild Wars 1 events that we held, which was like a farewell Bill, who is he was a arena employee who basically worked on Guild Wars 1 in his free time, like while it was in maintenance mode, which is great. You came and shoutcasted the monthly there. Was there any sort of difference between, obviously they're two completely different games in the way they play. But was there anything there that you thought, oh, that could actually be pretty useful in Guild Wars 2? I don't
know. So that was definitely a bit of a challenge just because I didn't really know. I hadn't really experienced GVG in Guild Wars 1. I didn't really, I didn't understand the meta really. I hadn't played the game for a very long time, so I honestly forgot a lot of the skills and stuff. So it was a little bit harder. I definitely liked, though, the sort of complexity that I think GVG had. Even now, however many years, 12, whatever years later since the game's been out, I think probably more than that, actually, 15 years, there's still people and teams that are, trying to outplay, in various different ways, whether it's the comp they're doing or the exact strategy they're doing in GVG. And I think that's really interesting. And I think that there are times you'll see that in Guild Wars 2 PvP, and actually the tournament that me and Teapot did just last week, the DL Conquest Open, there were actually a couple times where we saw that a little bit, and that actually made me excited. I got excited. People, they were trying comps that no one expected, not us, not the other players, and I thought that was really cool because I feel as though, over the years that I've casted, a lot of the times when a meta has become established, you just see that meta, and you just see that sort of 5-man, potentially maybe there's like room for one person to swap build or swap class. But I just don't think you see that very much. And I think one of the things that GVG has is obviously, you have to run the flags. And so that's just like an added objective on top of the game mode. And in Guild Wars 2 PvP and Conquest, which I do think is a good game mode, generally the map mechanics, at least on some maps, they're not as influential as others. So you won't necessarily see those. So a lot of what it comes down to in Guild Wars 2 Conquest is just winning the team fight. Almost always, I think, winning the team fight is the most impactful sort of play you can have in a game and on a map. And if you can do that consistently, you will just win the game. And while I personally enjoy watching team fights and casting them, of course, because, again, that's something that I like doing and I feel that I'm good at doing. If that's all they're doing, and that's every single game, it gets to the point where you're just basically watching the same thing on repeat. There's not a lot of complexity to it. There's not a lot of, again, I was saying before, it might be hard to understand what's going on the screen, and that's true for team fights, but there still isn't really a lot of complexity in terms of just they won the team fight, they won the game. And if that's happening every game, it can get a little bit repetitive. It can get a little bit boring. So I think the fact that there's multiple objectives, there's multiple ways to play around the objectives, there's different comps that work better for one objective or for going for one objective as opposed to another in GVG and Guild Wars 1, I think is really cool personally.
Yeah, there was some really interesting guild halls as well where you could have some sort of comps would benefit other ones. Speaking about the DL tournament, and you said there's some really interesting comps that popped up. I love that as well. If you sort of get into the same thing where everyone's going, okay, I'm going to run a shout warrior, double renegade, a core guard or something, and it does get boring. I 100% agree with you there. What was your sort of favorite one which caught you off guard this week?
So there was one game on NA where the top two NA teams, one was playing sort of the more meta comp, and then the other team, it was the first match of the set, and they came in and they just straight up played a bunker comp, and ironically, it didn't actually work against the team. I think mostly it just came down to the team that played the meta comp, them just being better. But it was interesting to me because it was something that completely unexpected. And again, going into the tournament this weekend, I may have said this on stream at one point as well. I was kind of just expecting to see every single team play, as you mentioned, a Holosmith, 2 Revenants, a Thief, and a Warrior. And I didn't really expect much variation from that because that was kind of what everyone was playing, and that's what I had seen people playing. And honestly, I mean, almost every team ran something slightly different, which was really cool. There was a team with a Druid. A lot of teams were running Dragon Hunter.
Yes.
There was even a team with a Mesmer, right? And, regardless of if they necessarily did well or not with those comps, playing that sort of off-meta stuff, it was just really cool for me to see people experimenting and trying things differently as opposed to just saying, okay, this is the meta, that's what we're going to play. And so, going back to that team that they played this bunker comp, and obviously I think a lot of people, they don't like seeing bunker comps, and I agree. I think bunker comps and a bunker meta is bad for the game. But the thing that was interesting to me was just that there was this team, they wanted to try to beat this team, and they were trying to beat a team that basically is considered unbeatable in an A. It's a team that has always won in an A. The only time they've lost was in the mode to rank 55, and they've essentially just run an A for the last 3 years. And so the thing to me that just stood out was, instead of just trying to match them at their own game, which eventually they had to try and it didn't work out, they tried something different. They just tried to basically cheese them. And obviously, again, things can be said for it not being interesting to watch or it just being cheese, but I still kind of like the idea there that, they're just trying different things to come up with, either throw this team off their balance or essentially beat them. And it actually almost worked. The first half of the game, they won. Unfortunately, they ended up getting behind, and when you're playing bunker, you can't get behind, or you just lose straight up. And it didn't work out for them, but it still was really interesting for me to see. And as if that had been every single game, I would have hated it, of course, because I don't want to watch bunkers every single game. But just for one game, it was cool to see them trying something new. It was cool to see them sort of throw a wrench in the system and really try to mess up the other team. And just kind of like try to outcomp them. So I liked that.
Yeah, a team which is quite famous on the EU side for doing stuff like that. We've had one of the members on is the French Worms with the French technology, where they just throw something so dumb into the system, and it works because people like say when we're dueling, we'll go right. I'm going to duel a Holosmith for absolute hours and hours and hours and hours. So I'm really comfortable dueling a Holosmith, and then something like weird like decap scrapper turns up, and you're like, what the fuck am I meant to do against this? And it is cool, and it does catch people off guard. I just love seeing weird comps like that, because especially if they're practiced as well in secret, they can pull off some like some big surprises in teams. And I would like to see that on the NA side, like you said. Like Team USA pretty much have ran the show on that side of the world for 3 years, while it's been a couple of teams on the EU side. I think it's a little bit healthier.
Yeah, EU is definitely more competitive. It has more teams, it has more players. And also, up until recently, I would say there have been more people willing to play with each other on EU, which is something that really holds NA back. There's just been a lot of drama and a lot of like personal petty stuff that gets in the way of people making teams on NA, which is really unfortunate. But yeah, I mean, in talking about the French Worms, as you mentioned, I think that for a really long time in the game, maybe forever really, and I have a little bit less knowledge about this, but I think it kind of has been the French players really sort of trying to come up with different things and theory craft different builds and comps and stuff and sort of shake up the meta. And I mean, as you mentioned, the French Worms do this very well. A lot of their players, they'll play stuff that no one has really thought about, and it ends up becoming meta because it's just so strong. And yeah, I mean, it's very interesting seeing them play these crazy builds that no one's thought of. And almost always, when we've run a tournament, you'll be like, all right, rank 55, they're gonna play the meta comp, they're gonna play it really well. Ultranum, they're gonna play the meta comp, they're gonna play it really well. French Worms, we don't know what they're gonna play. That's cool. I like that a lot. Not knowing what someone's gonna come with, especially when it's a team that has those really strong players. When it's a team that could win the entire tournament playing something that no one else is playing. That's awesome. Yeah, I love that.
They've got they've got the mechanics to back it up as well. That was what I used to love on. I've talked about it back in my day in Guild Wars 1. That in a tournament, like quite often you would have certain builds that would become famous because of a guild. Like there was Rebel Rising, they ran Raw Spike. And it was so cool that even the healer backline monks would even sort of have a little bit of attributes put into the sort of the smiting prayers, so they could all have a smite, and everything would go into that one. And I love that sort of builds would be known as, oh yeah, what team comp you running? Oh, I'm running rank 55 team comp or whatever, and it'd be like, I'm running Worms comp. I quite like that idea of that identity, and if every team sort of had a niche build, it'd be like, ooh, which one's going to win? Because they could all equally as viable. Instead of, I feel like in Guild Wars 2, there is very much the meta comp, and there's sort of maybe surprise tactics and other than that.
No, but still, you would have a lot more of this. You see, like you have Nate Hollow coming out of MODA, right? And all of these builds coming out of these awesome tournaments that you guys are putting on, which are completely saving the PvP game completely. And like, I want to ask you, if you're all right with this
of course.
segue, like what's the plans further, like for Moto 2 and whatever tournaments like these, like the one just passed this weekend, this past weekend?
So obviously, I think if anyone knows who I am, they're gonna know who Teapot is, right? And he's probably right now the most well-known sort of content creator, streamer, whatever for Guild Wars 2. And a lot of the PvP tournaments really kind of revolve around him. I'd be lying if I said I didn't have any, input or obviously assistance in running them, or building them up. But I mean, he's really the kind of the powerhouse there, the brains behind everything. I mean, the motive is obviously his creation. The delusional elitist or hard stuck as they're calling it now, I think, was again kind of his creation. So that community, that organization is kind of around him. So a lot of the time he'll just message me, be like, hey, I'm gonna do this PvP tournament in 2 months or whatever, and I'll be like, all right, I'll cast it, and that's it, and so it's not necessarily a lot of the time it comes down to him, I think. And there's definitely plans to do another MOTA. I know he wants to do one. I think the idea behind the tournament that we ran last week was that we were going to try and do one every 3 months, just to kind of keep things competitive, keep things fresh, keep momentum rolling in PvP until we did the MOTA 2. Unfortunately, and again, I don't want to get too deep into sort of harshing on ANET, but state of the game is not great right now. I'm a little bit more biased. Maybe I'm a little bit more turned off from the game than other people, but I think that right now the game feels very stagnant, and I think it's very difficult, and it's becoming increasingly difficult to try and run these things just because, again, basically everything comes down to Teapot. I mean, he has to create everything. He has to organize everything. He has to run everything. He's doing all the streaming. He's doing all the production. Obviously, the community in a very large way has funded, the prize pool for pretty much all these tournaments, and that's awesome. But, I think as time goes on, that community may not always be there to support those. And so if we aren't getting better support and more support from ArenaNet, it is going to be a lot harder, I think, to run these things. That being said, Teapot is insane. He's a crazy person, so he will continue to do this anyways. So I am very certain that we will see a MOTA 2 at some point, especially because there's an expansion coming out. We don't know when, but I mean, if that's a year from now, Teapot will be here a year from now, and he'll run a tournament. I can almost guarantee that. If I have time, I would absolutely love to, help him out with that if I'm still around and do that. So, to answer your question in a very long-winded fashion, as I do, yes, I think we have plans to do more tournaments in the future. I don't think we'll be seeing the MOTA 2 anytime soon. Certainly, I wouldn't expect before the expansion, probably, unless some crazy stuff happens and there's big changes. In terms of more tournaments like what we did this last weekend, I would guess probably not before next year. I don't think we're going to run anything in November, December. I know that there's been rumors of Tournament of Legends happening, which obviously would be, Arena themselves, and that would be great. And I'm sure I would cast that. Teapot would probably cast that if he doesn't play in it. But I think probably not before January or February would be the next sort of big tournament we would run, would be my guess. But that's not something we've discussed. That's not something we've made plans for, so don't quote me on that.
Yeah, but it's all in the hands of just a couple of players that are willing to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's amazing. I think this is a perfect opportunity to have the community kind of lend a hand more and do it more. Like if you need whatever help would be needed to put more of these on, like we do in houses, but it'd be great if we could expand them to all of these tournaments, like to have the small base of the PvP players that is like all together and kind of all involved in these tournaments, to make them bigger and to see more of this diversity and good plays and casting. And I think it'd be
Yeah, I think when you see on Twitch, like we've talked about this quite a few times, it's like when you look at the top streamers and what people enjoy to watch with Guild Wars 2 content, it's always PvP, always.
Mm-hmm.
I'll love to watch sort of like Sind, Hellsafe, Boyce. I love watching their streams because the sort of the mechanical level as well is so entertaining. And you get like you shoutcasting thrown on top of all that. It's just like, oh, this is brilliant. I love it. And I suppose a lot of people it would be nice if if Arena sort of put a bit more resources into sort of the tournament scene, I would quite like, or the spectating side. It'd be quite enjoyable. The thing I liked in Guild Wars 1 is that the skill bars would rock up and just at the top when whoever you're watching, so you could actually, yes, obviously you can see them clicking the skills, but even if it just pops up above their head or something like that, or somewhere on the screen, then people can go, okay, he's using that. I think that'd be quite a nice thing.
Yeah, I think some people would be a little concerned about more visual clutter because there's already a lot of it, and people would say that would just add to it. But I mean that also, on the same side, could certainly make it easier for people to see what's going on and understand what's going on. So I mean, it's kind of a pro con thing there. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's I think there's a bunch of things that you could think about that would make the game a little bit better to watch. But that sort of just comes back to ArenaNet being willing to put the effort and the time and resources into that.
Yeah, something I've kind of wanted to speak to you about is obviously you said you play a lot on the EU sort of side of things, but you are on the over the pond from NA. In Motor, obviously there's quite a bit of rivalry going on who's the better server and who's got. And NA were quite fond of Firebrand at the time, right?
Yep.
And is the meta now, because you obviously say you play on both sides, is the meta the same or is it still kind of different? Or
you mean between the two regions?
Yeah, in between. That's because I'm curious on that.
It's hard to say just because I think we saw with the MOTA, obviously NA was very fond of the Firebrand and it ended up not working out for them. I don't think that is necessarily indicative of NA always being wrong. I know obviously people like to meme and always say EU's better than NA, of course, and fair enough. Rank 55 beat Team USA, obviously. They won. But I actually I talked to Naru a little bit about this. Naru being the sort of captain of Team USA, and when they won the tournament on Sunday, this past weekend, and I said, "Do you feel more confident in this meta than you did before?" And he actually said yes. He thinks that they would have a better shot, if there was another cross-region match. He thinks that Spellbreaker is a little bit easier to play than Tempest. Obviously, he'd been practicing it. The comp that Rank 55 ran in the MOTA and Team USA ended up trying to match them with wasn't something they had really practiced very much. It wasn't something they had a lot of experience with. So in terms of the meta being different, I think you're always going to see just, difference from different teams, from different players, and certainly different regions. But I do think, at least at the top level, there's a little bit more understanding now, maybe from NA, that they need to be more aware of what EU's doing. I think there was, from both regions, there a bit of a lack of respect for the other teams. I think, honestly, the EU teams didn't expect to lose, and I don't think the NA teams expected to lose, really. Because, there wasn't a lot of cross-region play before the MOTA. And so I think that when you see more of that happening, teams will start to sort of be understand a little bit better, and respect each other a little bit more, I think, and sort of say, okay, that's working over there, maybe we should try it. Or, maybe this would be a good counter to what they're doing over there, instead of just saying, this is what we're running, this is the best thing we can run, there's nothing else. And I think that has started to change, and that's a good thing, because I think it evolves the scene a bit more. But yeah, I mean, there's certainly still going to be a bit of a difference between the two scenes, for sure. I think, as we saw last weekend, Dragon Hunter was something that all the EU teams started to play all of a sudden. I shouldn't say all of them, but a lot of them. And throughout the entire thing, NA was saying, no, this isn't good, this is bad. I think there were a couple teams on NA that tried it, but at the end of the day, most of them still stuck with the second Revenant or something else, but just not the Dragon Hunter quite as much. So yeah, there's definitely still a difference, but it's not as distinct as it was before.
Yeah, the Dragon Hunter is so dangerous. I've been running it for quite a while now, and I call it the pleb farmer, because I've got quite a few clips of me 1v3ing people. Just throw down the symbols, throw down that Sword of Justice, and just like 17 stacks of burn on 3 people, and you're just like, enjoy that, buddy. It's one which, if you don't sort of keep in mind, you get screwed over. So it is very much a good build, but it can be easily shut down, which are probably the reason then they don't like it.
Yeah, I think Burn Guardian has kind of always existed in the sense that it can pub stomp in ranked, also in World versus World to some extent. But I think it certainly has a harder time doing that once it gets into the monthly AT, the tournaments, the real competitive 5v5 games. But obviously, the current iteration of it can be very strong, can be very competent. And yeah, I mean, it's just we're just gonna have to see how that changes with the next balance patch. If it's still gonna be as strong as it is now, or if it's gonna be worse, if it's gonna be better.
On that note, Roy, what kind of shifts would you like to see, like within the community and within the balance?
In terms of balance, I say this all the time. The most important thing we need for balancing is just more. We just need more balancing. I don't even care if I mean I do care, but even if the changes they start making end up making the game feel worse to play. Obviously I don't want that, but more than anything else, what in my opinion all the competitive modes need, so GVG obviously community, but World vs. World and PvP, what they need more than anything is just more balance, because the meta has, I think, especially for World vs. World, felt very still for a really long time, and it doesn't shift enough. And I think that PvP has started to get better at this. I think we've started to see more shifts in PvP balance and the meta and stuff, and that happening more often, and I think that's awesome. But I would just like to see a better response to a lot of the balance things, and specifically, if there's something in the game that is extremely oppressive, really bad for the game mode, not enjoyable to play against, no one wants to play it, but everyone does because of how strong it is. So decap scrapper, old bunker chrono and stuff. When things like that exist, they have to be dealt with in a much better and more timely fashion than I think they are now. I mean, I think just hotfix it, nerf it, whatever way you have to, but just do it faster. That sort of thing should not exist for months at a time, and that's happened way too often in the past. So, overall, I would love to see balance more often, even if it's smaller patches. It doesn't have to be the giant February patch we had from the beginning of this year, but just more consistent, more often balance changes. I don't know if you want to touch upon that before I move to the community part.
Yeah. I mean, of course, frequency would be the most like. I'm second that completely. Like it takes so long for a shift to happen within the balance. It's amazing what you can get away with in that time.
Well, it's one thing because I know these things are possible as well as like hot fixes. I don't know if I'm allowed to say stuff like it, but there have been instances where changes have been implemented and then they have been hot fixed because it's just like no, usually because it impacts other parts of the game.
Yeah.
That's usually when they get fixed. But if it's like it's PvP or so world, they're just like we can fix that later. And I'd like to see if it goes no, it's breaking PvP. We need to fix that shit. That's the attitude it needs to be. If it's sort of not breaking but ruining the experience is how I would sort of put it. Is if it's ruining the experience for players, then it needs to be fixed.
Yeah, I agree.
So the community bit, what we got? Sort of, I'm sidetracked now. What was yeah? Go ahead.
Yeah, what sort of changes would I like to see in the community? I mean, I think that's certainly a bit of a harder topic to get into because there's so many different ways to look at it, and there's so many different sort of variables there. One of the biggest things I think that holds back game modes like PvP, like GVG, is a lack of population and a lack, or rather, the lack of an influx of new players. And that's something that's very difficult to, I think, get. I think it's very difficult, certainly where we are right now, to sort of get it. And that's part of the idea behind what Teapot's trying to do with the organization he's created, the Delusional Elitists. But I think that those sort of game modes, they suffer without population. And, going back to what we're talking about in terms of EU versus NA, EU has always seemed to be better and more competitive and have more teams and have more players, and NA has not. And I think that really hurts NA, and I think that also just makes it harder, to try and organize events because, there'll be so many times where we're organizing an event, right, and we'll do EU one day and NA the next day, and we'll say, all right, EU, we're going to have these 5 teams, right? These are 5 real competitive teams that are going to really, like we don't know which one of them is going to win. Obviously, one might have an edge over the other, but, anything can happen. And then on NA, we're like, all right, well, we're going to have Team USA, and then we're going to have the team that's going to try to beat them, and that's it. And, that's kind of the sad reality of the situation where you just don't really see a lot of new teams cropping up on an A and staying consistent and staying competitive. And that was one of the reasons where, with the MODA, I really wanted to sort of push the monthlies leading up to it, and the months leading up to it. I wanted teams to stick together and try to create those teams in order to win. And I think we had some success with it. It wasn't as much success as maybe I would have liked, but I think it definitely helped. But overall, I think the community just needs to try and work together more. And that's apart from, encouraging new players to join and helping new players through various different methods, which again, I think is something that's a bit harder to do. I think the community really needs to work with itself more. I think that more than almost anything, the community shoots itself in the foot by just being unwilling to see anything from someone else's point of view, being unwilling to try and discuss things in a better manner, whether that's the balanced Discord or public Discords or whatever. People for some reason feel the need to be toxic and put other people down, more than they should. And this could be me being naive, but I don't see the point. I hate drama personally. It kind of just turns me off completely from anything. But I just think that the community really needs to realize that unless they don't care at all about the future of the game or the game mode or the community, they have to change. Because, again, look at NA. There have been so many times where I think there have been opportunities for teams to come together, players to come together, and consistently win, consistently beat Team USA, or at least be competitive with them. And I think it just hasn't happened because one person's like, nah, I don't want to play with this guy. Or, this guy did something to me and I don't like him anymore. And I mean, that's fair, but you're never going to be able to move forward. You're never going to be able to grow as a community if you continue to just harass each other and hurt each other, put each other down, refuse to work with each other. You will not get anywhere doing that. And I don't think EU necessarily does it better than NA. I just think they have a little bit of an advantage in population. And I kind of mentioned this earlier. I think more recently EU's actually started to do this more, which is really bad. I don't like that. I think it's a step in the wrong direction. I hope it doesn't continue. I hope that we see change, positive change, and I'd love to be able to try and foster that. But I think it really does come down to the individual players themselves, and they need to, especially the higher end PvP players, they need to sort of set an example for everybody else.
Yeah, I've noticed a few in the Discords, like there's been issues and things, but it seems like it's been stamped out quite immediately, which is a good thing. But bring it on a sort of a positive sort of note again, off the toxicity subject. Think, because you were talking about a team struggling to sort of stay together and things. From like my point of view, because I've like myself and Crayola, we've been in a few teams, and I think our problem is the game does a pretty poor job of incentivizing your team to stay together. Like, because it's like if it doesn't give you a proper rank at the end of a like an MAT. It basically goes, okay, these guys came first, cool. Like, yes, you get between 9th and 18th, but I'd quite like to know, is my team 9th in because the reason in Guild Wars 1, again, refer it all back to there, because guilds had a rating, like the team had a rating, which I really liked. And then it's sort of, okay, this guild is rank 10 in EU, cool. And that's sort of a little incentive to sort of stick together as a team, instead of just going, I'm going to go for LFG on the monthly. Sort of having that prestige behind a team is quite a nice thing, and I think it's needed in the game in order for teams to stick together and thrive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something that was lacking from World of Warcraft 2. I think if you were in a guild that was the best GVG guild, unless you were, talking to someone from another GVG guild, no one would have any idea what you were talking about. I could say, oh, I was an Ash. You guys probably wouldn't know what I was talking about. Most people probably wouldn't know what I was talking about. And I think having some sort of in-game leaderboard like that would be awesome. If you could register a PvP team, in there. And I think a lot of people will know who Rank 55 is because they were a team that played, in Worlds. I mean, it's a team that's been around in Guild Wars 2 for a long time. But if I was to say to some random person, oh, Rank 55 is the best team on, PvP team in the game or whatever, they might say, yeah, okay. And then if I say, and then the French Worms or Lakers, whatever they're calling themselves, is the second best team, they might say, who is that? They have no idea. And I think some in-game system like that would be great. I think that would be very cool. I think that would definitely incentivize people to try climb. I mean, if you look at the PvP leaderboards, right, people, they try to get top, they try to get first place. They try to get top 10 or whatever. Something like that in game for teams, that would be pretty cool. But again, that's something that, Arena needs to implement. In terms of from just like the player point of view, what you were saying, where you and Crayola have, you guys have had some difficulties making teams and stuff. I think it's very difficult. I think it's one of the hardest things you can do is to try and make a team, with whatever goal in mind and do that consistently. But I think, if you really want to try and do that, if you believe in that, and you also understand that overall more people are doing that, it's going to make the community and the scene better. You have to understand it's going to be something that takes a while, right? It's not something that you can just do and do immediately. It's not like you can just form a team together, play a couple of ATs, and then win the monthly, or necessarily even do well in the monthly. It takes time. I mean, again, the reason that Team USA has been the best team on NA for such a long time, apart from the two reasons, one being that they have very strong players, and two that there's not really a lot of other competition. They've been playing together for a very long time, and they've been playing PvP at a high level for a very long time. So that's a team that you usually are not going to see lose to most teams. And that's something that people have to understand. I think, and I highly and strongly encourage everybody, if you're interested in PvP, start playing with people, start playing with your friends, duo queue, 5-man queue unranked, whatever. Make teams, play daily ATs, play monthly ATs, but you have to be able to, one, put the effort in to try to actually improve, and that's something that a lot of people don't do, and a lot of people don't understand, and two, it takes time. It's not something that's going to happen immediately.
That's really cool to hear, Roy, and I agree with absolutely 100% everything. It is so difficult to find a team, and it is demoralizing when you go, oh, brilliant, I'm against rank 55 and I'm going to get 500 old. But that sort of, you want to look at the games that you are playing and play with your friends, because the reason I enjoy sort of PvP in any game is just playing with people. I get very bored of solo queue in anything, and a lot of people hate solo queue.
Yeah.
I don't know about you. I enjoy playing. I quite enjoy the 5 stacking in unranked as much as people might hate it, but I play with my friends.
Yeah.
And it may not be about like the winning side of things, but sort of it will improve the PvP scene. If we've got several teams in there, and over time, like you said, you're gonna get better. You're gonna become more well known. Excuse me. And it'll be nice to see. We all want the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you said it before, Roy, like players encouraging other players. I think word of mouth in that regard would be the best thing, of course. Like, so as what you're doing and what Teapot is doing, but like more people doing that, not just separately, but together. Like, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there definitely has to be a little bit of initiative taken on the players' part themselves. I think if you're obviously someone can say, hey, you should go and do this, or hey, if you need some help, I can help you with this. But it does obviously come back to the player themselves, looking up a better build, or looking up a better comp, or watching a stream and trying to understand why someone does something, or even asking a question saying, hey, Sind, why did you go here instead of there, or whatever, and then taking that answer and learning from it. And I'll bring this back to GVG. In a lot of ways there have been specific guilds in the history of the game that have always performed better than others because they have people that really drive those guilds forward and really push their players to improve. And if you don't have that attitude, you don't have at least a small part of that initiative, then you aren't going to, you're not going to take that initiative if you don't have it, obviously, but you're not going to start improving. You're not going to start understanding better why you're doing, what you're doing, why the mistakes you're making are holding you back. So it does come back to the players a bit, I think, and there has to be some part of it there. But 100%, I think that, the community should be encouraging newer players, because without new players, without more people playing the game mode, we're not going to move forward. I mean, maybe a year from now, we have the exact same teams we have now. I don't think that's a victory, in my opinion. I think that's bad. I don't think, even if it's the same teams, we haven't lost any, I still think that's a bad thing. I think you should want to see new players, and you should want to see new teams coming in. And yeah, word of mouth is great.
For sure.
Right, I'm trying to I'm trying to think of other things that we could potentially talk about now. We've covered so much there. Thank you, Roy. I think I'm running out of ideas now. Unless there's anything that springs to mind, Creole.
Dude, I don't know. I'd just like to praise once more the effort you guys are putting in with Teapot. The tournaments, because that's one of the like that was a big incentive for us to start this as well.
Yeah, and I think this initiative itself, what you guys are doing, I think is great. I wish there were more resources like this. And I mean, this isn't necessarily a resource in the same sense as Meta Battle might be, but I think that this sort of thing is great. I mean, myself, I like podcasts. I think they're a cool idea. Obviously, I like talking, so that's of course a plus. But I think just being able to sit down and listen to a couple of people talk about the game or whatever subject it might be, I think is really cool and really nice, just to get a different perspective, even if it's not something you end up agreeing with. I think hearing another perspective is really cool. So I think that you guys are doing this is awesome. In terms of everything that Teapot's doing, yeah, he certainly deserves the praise. I don't want to make it sound as if I've really done that much, because again, it really comes back to Teapot. It's him that should be getting the praise, not me. And all the other awesome content creators and community people we have. So it's those guys that deserve the credit, really.
Yeah, Teapot's carrying the game. Well, on Twitch, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I think that's a good sort of segue to sort of wrap things up there. Thank you very much, Roy, for coming on the show and speaking with us. It's nice to have you on.
Yeah, man. It's great to be here. Like I said, I love this. I think this is awesome. This is a lot of fun. And I was very excited to come on. So thank you very much for having me. And I think what you guys are doing is great.
Yep.
Thank you very much for being on. We're definitely just trying to create like conversation. So
yeah,
we're always up for it, of course.
Absolutely.
But for those who might not be aware of our other content or even your content, where can people find you, Roy?
So right now, I've last few months I've kind of taken a bit of a step back. Obviously, I'm still involved with the community on Discords and stuff, and various tournaments and whatnot. I haven't been streaming as much. I stream the monthlies and when I cast them, but I'm not actively streaming right now. But I mean, you can find me on Discord, I guess, if you're in most of the sort of public PvP Discords. And obviously, you're always welcome to. If you need something, message me. But for the most part, I'm not actively streaming right now. So, yeah.
Brilliant. Well, for those who want to find us, obviously you're listening to the podcast. If you want to find us on YouTube, so that's ArenaLabs. If you want to get involved with our in-house games, Crayola, where can they find them?
In the links. In the description.
Just throwing you on the spot there. Yeah, message us in games. You can find us on Twitch as well on the ArenaLabs. We host them every Sunday. But yeah, we'll wrap things up there. I've obviously been your host, Sneakers. We've had Crayola and Roy on. We'll stay competitive, and we'll see you all in the arena. Peace.
Cheers.
Cheers.